In order to accurately cut out a rear leg, what we need to do is make sure that this rear joint right here is exactly perpendicular to the joint itself. In other words, if the leg were sitting like this after being attached to the seat, or like this, of course the bar stool wouldn't sit correctly. So it's very, very important that we cut this joint out perfectly. In order to do that, we're going to create ourselves a jig. Now what I have is the templates, and I've sprayed the template paper down to a piece of, looks like masonite in this case, so I have myself a jig. There are reference lines for the joint. I want you to transfer those reference lines to the thickness, to the rear of the jig or the template itself. So you have basically two lines in back there. The next thing we need to do is we have a couple pieces of MDF in order to create this jig. And once we create it, we'll be able to use it for both rear legs and any future bar stools we build. It's really a pretty simple jig. I have two pieces of MDF, in other words, one on top of the other. They're both about 31 inches or so in length. The top one is about 9 3/4 inch in width, and the bottom one is about 14 inches in width. Now these measurements aren't exactly critical, so if you want to change it up just a little bit, go ahead and do that. What is important though is I have my fence on my table saw locked down. I have both of these pieces of MDF flush against the fence, and what I do is I take this front part of the template, this flat portion, and I put it up against my saw fence. I make sure the bottom of the template is flush with the bottom of my jig here. And it doesn't matter if this piece of MDF covers the entire leg template. We're not going to use this top part at all. With that all done, I take my pencil and I trace this back profile of the template itself. Just the back profile is all we need. Now those two lines that we marked on the side of our template here, I want you to transfer those two lines onto this jig. Just go ahead and make a little tick mark where those two lines are. Now, what we have to do is basically take these, and we want to transfer these two lines straight across the front of our jig so we don't lose them after we cut this out. Go ahead and take yourself a straight edge and do that now. Well, in a nutshell, this is basically how the jig is going to work. Let's pretend for a moment that this isn't our template, that this is actually our rear leg. If you look on this jig piece of MDF we have right here, what I'm going to be doing is cutting out this section right here and just throwing it away. That's waste. After that, I'm going to have left over this part of the top piece of MDF and of course the base for the jig itself. If I were to place my rear leg and line it up on those reference marks, I'm then able to cut off flush right along this joint, which will make a perfectly angled joint. However, to make this jig a little bit safer, we need some way to hold down the rear leg as we're running it through the table saw. So I have here just a block of wood to give me a little elevation, and I have one of these sort of cam locking clamp things, hold down clamps. And what I do is I mount it to this and mount it to where when this goes up and down, it will lock that rear leg in place. So that's basically the concept we're going to be using. With that in mind, let's go ahead and take this top piece of MDF and cut out this profile on the bandsaw. Now to finalize the jig, this is what I've done. I've cut out that profile that we drew. Basically this profile here should match up with the rear of the rear leg. So once again, take your template here, line it up with the bottom of your jig on the large piece of MDF, then take this other piece of MDF and line it up with the rear leg, making sure that those registration marks line up perfectly. Now basically I have what my jig is going to look like. The last step is to go ahead and secure these two pieces of MDF to each other. In my case, I'll probably put some glue and then some screws or brads in there just to keep them together. The last step and then would be to mount this clamp, this hold down clamp someplace. You want to make sure that the clamp, when it comes down, of course, that it would be sitting on top of where the leg would be. So just make sure you position this correctly, left or right. So anyway, that's the plan. So let's go ahead and glue and clamp this up, and our jig will be done. We can go ahead and cut out some rear legs. Now there's the jig as it looks. You want to make sure when you drill from the back side that you countersink these screws, because of course you don't want the screws to be scratching your table saw tabletop. But that's basically what the jig is, and what it does is it ensures that this angle here is perfect. All we have to do is line up our registration marks on the jig when we put our rear leg on there, clamp the rear leg down, and cut it off straight and flush on this line. Now, depending on how wide you cut the base of your MDF will dictate how far you move the fence in order to make that cut. As I said, mine is exactly 14 inches, so I'm going to make a little mark on my jig that says set the fence to 14 inches. And that's it.